Welcome to Love, Lust, Betrayal. Before we start the story, please subscribe and press the bell icon. Let's dive into story. It was nearly midnight on a remote stretch of Highway 57 in South Louisiana at the Turnpike. The full moon shone through the leafless trees of late November, illuminating an eerie scene. A lone breeze was blowing, making the humid night air seem much colder than the 50-degree temperature. Somewhere in the distance, the cry of a great horned owl pierced the night. At that moment, Deputy Yul Gillery, a first-year sheriff's deputy, got a headache from the continuous flashing of 8 ambulances at the crash scene. 2 fire trucks, 1 search and rescue vehicle, 2 ambulances, and 3 police cruisers seemed excessive for a one-car accident on a deserted stretch of Highway 57 south of Duloc, Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana. To the untrained eye, it was a classic case of a driver going too fast on an old country road known for its tight turns and abundance of wildlife scurrying back and forth in search of food in the bayou. But as a rookie deputy, Gillery didn't know what he didn't know. He had an education ahead of him. A lone unmarked police cruiser pulled up to the crash site. Terrebonne Parish Sheriff Landry Broussard stepped out of the car without sirens or blinkers, like a man on his way to a dentist appointment. He knew what awaited him. He'd been here before and wasn't particularly excited to be back. Wanting to make a good impression on the chief and overestimating his boss's patience with newcomers, he confidently approached the sheriff. "Looks like some idiot pulled to the side of the road too fast, Sheriff. Lost control and ended up in the swamp." Broussard barely audibly muttered, "Who the hell are you?" There were over 300 employees in the department, and the sheriff knew many but not all of his men. "Excuse me, sir. I'm Deputy Gillery. I've only been with the department for 6 months." Broussard kept walking. "Well, Gillery, shut up. Keep your eyes and ears open. Maybe you'll learn something and not embarrass the department." "Yes, sir." The sheriff stopped at the edge of the road where the embankment transitioned to the sidewalk and looked down. Directly below him, overturned, lay what appeared to be the charred remains of a late-model Ford F-150. Landry pulled a Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust Stillwell Star Bayou No. 32 cigar from his pocket, trimmed the end and lit it with the lighter. He let out a couple rings of smoke thoughtfully, then turned to the crew below. "Shaw Jacqueline, is that you down there?" "Damn right, Sheriff Broussard, of course it's me. Who else would work for you for such a shitty paycheck and always do an excellent job? And how many times do I have to tell you to call me Jackie, you Cajun hick?" Landry liked 2 things about Detective Jackie Fontenot. One, she was right, she always did a great job. And second, she was one of his 12 nieces who, truth be told, was his favorite. He could always tease her and she would immediately fight back. "So, mon amour, what does your gut tell you?" "Give me 5 more minutes, Sheriff, and I'll get out of this filthy hole crawling with coca dress and give you a full briefing." Sheriff Landry relaxed and waited patiently for Jackie to finish his first look at the mess below. He noticed a very nervous Deputy Gillery standing nearby, gagged, but eager to make a good impression on his boss. "Relax, Yul, I remember you now. I used to run with your Uncle Rock back in the day." Glad to see someone from his family trying to accomplish something. The deputy smiled and nodded, but prudently continued to remain silent. 30-year-old Sheriff's Detective Jacqueline Fontenot finally rose from the rubble. If she hadn't been covered head to toe in sweat and swamp mud, she wouldn't have been conspicuous. Her long dark hair was gathered into a tight ponytail that fell neatly off the back of her TSD baseball cap, and her chocolate brown eyes sparkled as she smiled broadly. It was obvious that she was eager to claim her findings and show her uncle that she could do something. He had never given her that chance before. She pulled off her dirty overalls and started to speak when Broussard interrupted her. "Let me guess, Cher, assuming the remains aren't too burned, you found 2 people, a man and a woman, dead in less than 6 hours. Both are in a state of undress, suggesting sexual intercourse. If you found ID on them, they're not husband and wife, but the woman, excuse me, was married." "How am I doing?" "Not bad, Bon Rain." "By all means, continue." "Skid marks on the road indicate that the truck was not traveling at a high rate of speed and did not skip a curve, but was pushed or forced off the road from where it was parked, about 40 yards back on the highway. Judging from the angle of the rubber left on the pavement, the driver tried to brake and swerve out of the way, but he was unsuccessful." He paused briefly, savoring his cigar and the detective's growing anger. Landry looked at her inquisitively, but she denied him the pleasure of answering. Then he continued. "His male sex organ was severed. If not, it was found on the floor of the car. In short, Detective Fontenot, this was a murder planned and carried out by someone or something who felt betrayed and angered by the behavior of these 2 cheaters. Inquiries from friends and relatives will eventually reveal at least 2 things. First, it is a love affair. The wife left her loving husband for the arms of her lover. As I said, the man may or may not have been married, but either way he was also a cheater, a man who engaged in sexual intercourse with a married woman and didn't care one bit about who would suffer as a result. Was he wearing a wedding ring? Yes. In that case, the second thing that will be true is that neither spouse will be found to be involved in the crime. Both would have a solid alibi and would be shocked to learn of the event. The same can be said for relatives or friends who may have known of the victim's betrayal of their marriage vows. This case will never be solved. What did I do to Cher? Jackie didn't answer for a while, rather looking away as if trying to remember some name or place. When she finally answered, she seemed unable to believe her own words. Defend pauvre Félix Bonvillain. Only if you believe the legend, mon cher. And in history, Jackie added. At this point, the rookie deputy succumbed to curiosity and spoke up. Pardon me, Sheriff, but what's all this about? Who was Félix Bonvillain and what's the legend? Well, my boy, let me tell you the story. Félix Bonvillain was born just after the Civil War, to a wealthy planter family in our parish. By all accounts, he was a hard-working and devout man, one of the first and only to help former slaves. He married his young love, Marie Schaefer, the beautiful daughter of Thomas Schaefer, another prominent resident of our area. She seems to have loved him in return and gave him 2 sturdy young sons. 15 years after the marriage, however, Félix discovered that his wife had not been faithful. She was reportedly dating a local rogue named Alphonse Robichaud, who was rumored to have slept with several young wives in 2 or 3 parishes. But his debauchery with married members of the weaker sex was never proven. The story goes that Félix, a kind and generous man, refused to be played for a fool. His pride would never allow him to become a lovelorn cuckold. So he patiently hatched plans, watched, and waited until he discovered the couple in the backseat of Alphonse's carriage, naked and ardently indulging in sexual pleasures. In a rage, the offended husband snatched a saber and stripped Monsieur Robichaud of his sex organ, after which he killed both of them and fed them to the swamp. As the story goes, Félix took his revenge, but never recovered from the betrayal of his love. They say he went mad, left his home, and wandered in the swamp until his death. But, Deputy Guillory interjected, what does that have to do with this situation? Even if these two were crooks, Bonvillain has been dead for nearly 100 years. At this point, Detective Fontenot took up the case. Yes, but it is said that to this day the ghost of Félix finds no rest. He roams the roads and back alleys of our beloved parish, seeking out and punishing all who have strayed from their vows and treacherously betrayed their marriage. That's absurd, replied the naive deputy. Isn't it, Bully? Objected the sheriff. You don't know anything about this story. 1938, Delphine Bordeaux and John Dumont. 1951, Helene Léger and Herbert Como. 1984, Sabine Arbor and Emmerich Rivet. 2001, Ursule Patry and Albin Flan. All of them were found dead, as was our couple tonight. Jackie continued. All cheated on their spouses and all were avenged by the ghost of Félix Bonvillain, a faithful follower of Anthony of Padua. Both the sheriff and detective crossed themselves. The patron saint of lost love, concluded Broussard. 4 hours earlier. Babette Sebastian was naked except for a thigh-high skirt and lavender panties that dangled loosely from her left ankle as she had sex with her lover. Gus Otten, for his part, gave as much as he received. Babe and Gus had been intimate for over 6 months, having first committed adultery behind the walls of the local high school where Gus worked as athletic director and Babe taught 9th grade math. They had been having fun behind their spouses' backs for months and truly believed they would never be found out. Their first tryst occurred on an evening when Babe was beyond furious at her husband Luke for not waiting for her to come home before taking their 2 children to a local park. Luke called her cell phone several times, but she ignored him while she prepared the last of the week's work. When she finally listened to his message, she realized she had failed. Cher, I took the kids to the park since it's only an hour before sundown. We promised them we'd go together, but since you're not answering your cell phone again, I'm taking them alone. I'll meet you there if you make it. All 3 of us would love it if you'd join us. Babe knew she was wrong, but she was a stubborn and proud woman who didn't want to be bossed around by her loving husband. For his part, Luke adored her, perhaps even too much, and rarely relented when she was wrong. As a result, she always found a way to blame him and justify her immature behavior. As she stomped to her car across the empty parking lot, she spotted Gus coming out of the gym. AD, like every other male teacher at the high school, secretly lusted after the young mother of 2. She was trim, overweight, possessed a quick wit and enjoyed teasing her compatriots. She turned them on but only up to a point before letting them down. As she approached, Gus could almost see smoke coming out of her ears as she muttered, Bastards trying to make me look bad in front of the kids. No fucking sex for him for a week. Gus, who was no stranger to marital arguments with his fiancée or taking advantage of any available girl, decided to make his move. Playing the understanding friend, he talked her down for about 30 minutes before she climbed into his pickup truck, which he promptly drove to a secluded spot behind the school. To his utter delight, they had sex like rabbits almost immediately after he put the car in park. She told him it was a one-time thing, that she was just mad at her husband and needed to blow off steam. Gus didn't argue or suggest otherwise. He just watched and waited. He knew that once she tasted it, she would come back for more. 2 weeks later, his hunch was confirmed. She showed up at his office early one Saturday morning. He mentioned that he liked to work non-stop when the school grounds and buildings were empty. Arriving unannounced, she slept with him. When she left, she was concerned that his handprints on her ass, where he spanked her, might show up later. So she made a note to herself to be careful how she undressed that night. Luke never noticed when she got into bed. It was already dark. From then on, Gus and Babe had sex at least twice a week. The night they died, it was the second session in a week. Gus Nola's wife had taken the kids away to her parents in Baton Rouge for the weekend. Luke was on a fishing trip and Babe's kids were at her parents' house. After the first round of sex, Gus began to forcefully hold Baby's head down when they both thought they heard a whisper in the dark. Cheaters must pay. Deceivers must pay. Cheaters must pay. Gus let go of her head and Babe lifted up slightly, snuggling against her lover. "What was that?" she hissed. He was silent for a moment but then smiled lustfully. "Nothing, mon cher. Please continue to service your stallion." The little girl hesitated for a moment but then obeyed. And suddenly, a little louder this time, the silence was broken by a voice full of venom and rage. "The cheaters must pay." Confused and worried, Gus started the car, put it in gear and started to pull away when the voice gained strength. His hands clamped down on Babe's head again. Somehow, without ever touching the shifter, Gus put the truck into neutral and jerked forward. Babe screamed for Gus to let her go but all that was heard in response was, "Murph, glitch, glitch, Murph." Gus tried to grab the steering wheel and steer the truck sideways, but his hands were locked and unable to move. He frantically tried to move his feet to the brake pedal, but it was all to no avail. He froze as if restrained in his arms and legs by chains that held him tightly. "The cheaters must pay, cheaters must pay, cheaters must pay." The voice now sounded as if it was coming from someone in the cab, but no one and nothing could be seen as the truck, under some invisible force, moved closer and closer to the highway embankment. Gus's legs suddenly felt free, and he applied the brakes as hard as he could. The truck's resistance to the invisible force that moved it made the tire rubber squeal, as if in agonizing pain. Closer and closer they came to the cliff, and even as Gus tried to block the movement, they picked up speed. The last 20 yards were brought to a close by the screams of doomed lovers and the incessant eerie sound of rubber on unyielding asphalt. Before the truck pulled onto the highway, the grinning face of an enraged, defiant Pauvre Felix Bonvillain appeared before the eyes of both men. And then came a hideous laugh, full of unimaginable pain and boundless glee, with the last words the crooks would hear in this life: "The cheaters will pay." The truck tumbled over a low cliff, crashed into the rocks below and burst into flames. The arrogant traitors of love met their final doom with screams as the flames engulfed them,